Today on Lincoln Fire and Rescue, here on LNK TV, we talk about unified command. You will understand how agencies worked together here within the city to make sure that you had water, to make sure that you were safe, medical calls, fire calls, all of that was handled. It's called unified command. What is it, and how it was used when flooding damaged Lincoln's well fields. City Transportation and Utilities Director Mickey Esposito joins Fire Chief Michael Despain to talk about it here. Mickey, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank
Chief,
you.
always good to have you.
Happy to be here.
I want the Chief also to recognize LFR accomplishments. Before our conversation is through, we'll talk about the Innovation Award and then the reaccreditation. All right?
Yeah.
You're good for that to talk about that.
Absolutely. We're always proud to talk about that. So just like LTU and Health Department and the Police Department, just like schools and hospitals, there's an accreditation process for our profession, and so Lincoln Fire and Rescue has been a leader in that for many years. They were one of the first accredited fire agencies in 1997, and so we've been through that version a couple of times. We're happy to report that we were able to go through that process again, and in the meantime, during the same time, we actually won an award for innovation, and a lot of that had to do with the process that you were actually a part of with that citizen stakeholder group. And so the idea is that we reached out to the community to say, what level of service do you want, before we decided what level of service we could provide. And so that process with the accreditation process, that's a model that not only just looks at deployment, but it's really about transparency. Are you telling the customer X, and are you doing X? And so it basically is a kind of a watchdog group, if you will, for the community. And so I got to show off our award here a little bit. So this is our award for the next 5 years, and this basically says that we did a good job. We're transparent. We're providing good service to the community at the level that they've asked for, and we are committed to continuing that process moving forward. And again, the Innovation Award is one of those things that was unique to us. Not every agency does what we did, but a lot of agencies are starting to follow that. We get calls all the time on how we went through that process, and we happily share that. We would call rising tide lifts all ships, and so that's what we're trying to do. And so we're very proud of that. But as much as we love that, the day we got back from that award, we landed, Mickey decided to throw a party, and not her fault necessarily, but she had her hands full, and so it was our job to jump in and help with her, and that's where we started talking about the floods and what we did to respond to that.
Okay, unified command. Let's find out how it is different for a transportation and utilities. I have a general idea, having talked to the chief about this before, so put us in your world with the definition of unified command.
Okay. Well, it is sort of this command and control structure that LTU follows very informally for snow events, for water main breaks, for even well supply problems. We do kind of a regular command and control system during our own emergencies. But when things are at such a scale, as it was for the water supply well system, when we were in that event, it was just greater than ourselves, greater than we could even handle, and we needed to pull in additional resources for that flood response, including LFR, LPD, the Health Department, the Lincoln-Lancaster County EOC. We needed a lot of hands on deck. So that is a game changer for us. We don't normally have to deploy or ask for or request that much support, and can handle most of our events internally on our own.
What triggered it, Mickey? What was the point at which unified command was the best option?
Well, mostly it was the triggering event of the flood itself. When it was coming in and levels were rising in the Platte River, we knew that we didn't have any jeopardy to our water quality. We knew that we weren't jeopardizing our water supply as of kind of that Saturday before, but overnight, there was this turn overnight where we had a levee breach. And that really was a game changer for us. After the levee breach, just north of the North Wellfield, there was an inundation of water coming into that North Wellfield, which took out power. and it was the triggering event for Unified Command. However, even prior to that, we had been engaging our partners through the EOC. We always sort of, with a flooding event and a crisis of that scale, where it is county and statewide, the EOC is actively engaged in monitoring those weather events. So we always have them, even for snow events or local flooding events, they're always engaged. And so, but that overnight levee break really changed the situation for us enough to change the structure for us.
And what does Unified Command do with LFR? What triggers?
Yeah, well, for the purists out there that are watching me, the real framework we would call the incident command system. So that's the framework, and that is the requirement for the federal law says on large scale incidents you have to use the incident command system, and so it's scalable. There's lots of different pieces to this puzzle. Unified Command is in particular important. We would use incident command all the time, but like Mickey said, when we got to the point where we had multiple agencies all trying to come together and they all had a stake in the game, and I use the example is in the fire department, we really like water for putting out fires. We've become very fond of it. It's cheap, it works great, and so our model is built around it, but we can't do it without Mickey's help, and so we had a vested interest in making sure that how we deployed our resources, how we were to use water in cases of fire, how we help coordinate the response. And so we use Unified Command that basically says we are going to both be incident commanders. There was 3 or 4 of us involved. We would defer to say that Mickey's needs are higher than mine because we would like to have drinking water and hygiene more than firefighting water, but on the scale. But the issue is we had a lot of resources we could throw at that to help her and her team, whether it was getting them on aircraft or getting some logistical support, the command structure itself. So incident command is this very large, complex system of organizing an event. Unified Command is one component that you can kind of turn off. So if it's just an LFR incident, we wouldn't use Unified Command.
Right.
But a lot of times in agencies, police and fire do it all the time, so they're used to it. The utility agencies probably not as much, but more and more as kind of time goes by. But it's not just command, it has to do with things like, are we requesting resources efficiently? Like we wouldn't want her to order 5 of something and then me order 5 of something and it'd be, we didn't need it. The other issue is there's a legal aspect that says if you declare the disaster and you follow this law, we will get more money back from disaster assistance. If you don't, then you don't get the money. And so we had a commitment to make sure we were doing everything right so that the mayor gets the money back at the end of the day and we don't get fired.
That's right. It's kind of the best of all worlds. You have this incredible amount of support and a support team and structure in place, so there's no duplication of effort. Everybody's roles are clearly defined. Everybody's doing exactly what the team agrees we should be doing. So that's all really good, but it also tracks with kind of FEMA documentation requirements for reimbursement. And if you can check those boxes and document the process that you followed, then we can submit applications for reimbursement for the damage to our well system and the costs for deploying this structure. So it's kind of a win-win.
So if we don't do it right, the taxpayer has to pay the cost of our mistake. In our case, we did it right, and so now we protected the taxpayer and protected infrastructure. And kind of a good story and a good example of where if you don't use this, it gets off is we had already formed up, we had already started our meeting, and we were hours into this process when we were talking to one of the workers that was out trying to work on the well, and absolutely they're working in horrible conditions. You know, who knows, it was, I can't remember if it was early in the morning, late at night, it was dark and stormy and not fun, and they're working hard and they're trying to do their job. But while we're talking to them about an update, they're trying to tell us, like, hey, have you thought about rationing water? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And we're like, hey, stay in your lane, keep doing what you're doing, we got that, that's fine. And kind of the point is, not that we don't appreciate the suggestion, but it's like, don't waste brain power on those issues. Concentrate on your effort, because if you do your part, and the other person does theirs, and I do mine, and Mickey does hers, then that's the efficiency that we tried to see. And so we had a couple examples of that. But once everybody got in their lane and they stayed in their lane, then we got farther faster, and so the efficiency and effectiveness was measurable.
And that operational organization is so important for when you want to communicate with the public and let them know. And if you recall, we had a very robust communication strategy coming out of that. It was daily briefings, a lot of social media. We were able to facilitate that because we had such a great structure in place, and we were such a great team. And I tell you what, whenever there's a crisis of this magnitude, it brings great comfort and confidence when you have this exceptional team together working toward one common goal, because you can't control what's going on in the middle of a crisis, but what we could control is how we organized ourselves, how we communicated with the public every step of the way, and that brought, as far as I'm concerned, to me a lot of comfort in just being able to rely on the structure and the competency of our team.
Was this an incident that got worse, or once it was triggered, did it maintain its level of severity?
That's a great question. Let me hear your perspective first, and I'll give you mine.
Well, I think the issue is, there's always like, I think we're getting better, but something could turn wrong. So you always have contingency plans. So we couldn't ignore the fact that something else could go wrong. So I would say once we formed up, we were slowly making progress
Right.
towards a better solution, but we were always 1 minute away from losing power and being hours away from being out of the water. So we would say we were in crisis mode for quite a while, and then we kind of got into emergency mode, and then we got more into maybe a more routine, or within the framework of what they were available to do. But here's a good example. We cannot afford to get this wrong. So we always have to treat it as there's, the crisis is not just the one at hand, but what could happen an hour from now if something fails. But we also have to look at greater than just the water crisis. So a lot of discussion
Right.
was when we did water rationing and the mayor made that declaration, we knew there was an economic impact to the community. That was an economic burden to the community. The restaurants that had to
Yes.
do alternative, place settings and stuff. So every discussion was, are we still in crisis mode, or when can we go to emergency mode? Because we know that there's some economic impact, and we want to be sensitive to those. So we don't want
Right.
to just do it because it was convenient for us. So it was a very concerted discussion, but we
Yeah.
also could not afford to get it wrong, because it would be better to say, stay rationing another few hours and be solid, than to say, oh, we'll go backwards and then go forwards
Yeah.
and go backwards, because there's a lag time
Yeah.
with what we saw. And the community came out and did a great
Yes,
job
they
with their
did.
rationing. It was good I learned a lot in how long it takes for them they learned it quickly.
Yes.
But when we saw tracking, like, it might be 3 days before you see the best of the rationing come into
Right.
place. We don't have 3 days worth of supply and reserves.
Right,
So
right.
we just kind of learned where we have to be a little sooner on things, and then be careful about when you resend it. But I think we timed it right. I was very comfortable with where we
Yeah.
ended up, so we were
Yeah.
fortunate.
How close was the city from losing water?
We were, let's see, Sunday when the power went out to that North Well field, I think that was the most precarious position that we had been in, and Sunday going into Monday. So we talked about worst case scenarios, absolutely. We discussed it with the group, and how to prepare for worst case scenarios, including, things like shutting off manufacturing and restricting water use to important businesses and employers in the city of Lincoln. We talked about things like providing bottled water to people, and how do we get deployment of those resources to people to have drinking water that will sustain them. And we talked about borrowing water from MUD and getting maybe 1 million gallons or so from MUD. So there were some steps in contingency planning that we were talking about and discussing. Thank goodness we didn't have to go there. But we were close enough, as if at least to talk about it and discuss it. When the power came back on to our South Well field, it was absolutely a relief to everyone, because we knew at that time we could sustain the community at winter levels, consumption levels, for for the next few days. And we would work diligently while the river was receding and the water was going away. We could work diligently on restoring wells in the North Well Field. So.
Part of the issue is it's not like the water just turns off. Like
Yes.
hours later, it doesn't just
Yes.
shut off. There's a lowering of pressure that we
Right.
would have to make more austere measures. In the fire department, we had rules about. It wasn't like we would not fight fire. We wouldn't use water to. We would have to be
Right.
very practical with how we did that. So an example would be a building with no life safety, and unlikely that we were going to stop it without significant damage to the house. We sometimes still put water on it because we're protecting the structures around it, and we're trying to mitigate smoke so people don't have to be choking on smoke and products of combustion. This would be the case where you're going to choke on smoke because we have to be conserved. We have to conserve the water. But when you talk austerity measures, would be it's if everything was using the way it does, you might be out of water within 24 hours. But we would. Like Mickey said, there's processes we start cranking it down
Absolutely.
because hospitals or certain
Yes.
key facilities that it would be detrimental to
Yeah.
life and health to not have water there. So hard to say where that line was, but we wouldn't want to go there. And we were fortunate the community stepped up and did their part, so we didn't have to go to the next level and the next level.
What did it take to bring power back on?
Well, it took a redundant line, and thankfully OPPD, who is an exceptional partner all the time with our Lincoln Water System in Ashland, that's who we're serviced by. They were there 24/7 helping our staff get those connections. So thankfully we had a redundant line that we could tie back into the South Well Field. And while it brought on the South Well Field for the next few days, we were having a little trouble accessing the power in the North Well Field because of all of that inundation of water. It just had taken most of the ground out. And so, and you saw the video, I'm sure. So we were having a little more trouble there connecting power back. But fortunately, we had the South Well Field available to us in probably 4 hours. And that was a huge, kind of a life-saving reconnection of power there.
All right, back to a question of what triggered the unified command. What triggers it to be removed? When do you know you can sit back in your chair and go,
Yeah.
we're
Well,
ready to
we talked about
calm
that.
down?
So understand, incident command is still in place for that incident. We dissolved unified command once it got to the point where it was stayed within the capabilities of the primary agency. So once Mickey's team felt like now we're back to, it's not normal business, but it's within our capacity, we dissolved the unified command, but the incident command system, technically that the disaster declaration is still in place now and maybe for a year. Now that's a paperwork
Right.
process,
For
but there
reimbursement.
is still mitigation efforts that could get some grant money. There's still restoration projects that would be eligible for reimbursement. And so I think the question is, when do we count that incident completely done and close the books on it? It might be 2 or 3 years
Right.
before we do that.
Right.
But
Quite a process.
we wind it down as necessary and get resources back to where they need to go. And remember, during all of this, we still had USAR task force people all over the place, all over the state, making rescues right and left. We're still trying to take care of the localized issue. Day-to-day business still needs to be done, and then help with this incident going on.
So what did we learn? What comes from this? Do you put the electrical pole back in the same place? Do you move it to a higher spot? Do you move it to a different spot? What do you do differently?
Yeah, probably all of the above. We learned a lot from this, and we learned about how to be more resilient for events, future events like this one. And not only are we concentrating on making sure that we get any damage that corrected and remediated now, but we are certainly looking at how do we make our system even more resilient. So power poles, their structure, their constitution, where they're buried, where the lines, are they underground, are they overhead, are they both? All of that is being analyzed now and will continue to be analyzed throughout the remaining of the year. And then we need to talk seriously with the community about that second source of water supply. That is a conversation that just really needs to happen with respect to a connection to the Missouri River, an interconnect dialogue with maybe MUD and Omaha. Is it a regional water supply model? But we need that level of redundancy to avoid problems like this in the future.
But fair to say those conversations were going on before the flooding.
They were. They
This wasn't a
absolutely
flooding
were.
triggered
No.
discussion.
And, right. We were. But
Probably
we,
raises the priority.
It
though.
does. It definitely brings the priority forward, and we learned a great deal. We learned a great deal about how great our staff is and how much institutional knowledge they have. We had ground crews knee deep in water, no, hip deep in water, turning keys because they were finding and adjusting valves in the field so that we maintained pressure in the system. They were phenomenal.
Freezing cold water.
Freezing cold conditions, just dedicated public servants, making sure that when you turned on your tap, the water came through. So, I mean, I have a lot of love for that Lincoln Water system, those employees. They were tremendous, and they did an outstanding job just keeping the water on. We had tremendous partners with LFR and LPD and Health, and even LPS, the deployment of messaging from that group to kids, so that the kids would go tell mom and dad, you know, we need to pay attention to conservation. And then NEMA and FEMA and the National Guard, and how everyone just came together as a state really to help us out. It was a phenomenal response. It tells me a lot about how we are Lincoln strong and Nebraska strong. But in addition, I also thank the community for stepping up.
I think
big
that's a
time.
good point. I wanted to give the public props, viewers
Yeah.
props, because when it was a voluntary restriction,
Right.
you noticed that right away. And then when it
We
went
did.
mandatory, I was into businesses, and there
Right.
were restrooms that faucets were off.
That's
and There were
right.
hand sanitizer dispensers
Yeah.
all over the place.
Our
So
car
it
wash,
kicked in.
our car wash businesses,
Yep.
just hanging in there with us while they couldn't operate for a few days. And
A lot of
so-
people made sacrifices so that
They did.
we all hurt a little bit instead of hurting a lot. So
Yes,
it's very
that's
nice.
right.
Matter of fact, I still haven't washed my car.
Good job.
Go through twice to help reward those people for what they did.
Chief, props for the
Yes.
reaccreditation and the Innovation
Thank you.
Award. I know that the reaccreditation is more than just filling out some forms and paying
No,
a little
it's-
fee. There's a
My-
lot
my
more
staff
to it.
would remind me that there was
Yeah.
a lot more to that.
Yeah, I wish we had some more time to devote to that, because that's a
Yeah.
big deal.
That's
that
huge.
really is.
It is. It is.
And the fact that we have emergency dispatch, we have Lincoln Fire and Lincoln Police Department, we have
right.
an
Health
LTU,
Department,
Health
LTU.
Department.
I mean, all those agencies are all accredited. That's kind of unheard of for,
awesome.
for local government. You'll have one off here and there, but I think that's
Exactly.
a nice statement for Lincoln in terms of proving that there's the outcomes that we're trying to get for the customer is above board. So.
And who benefits? You benefit. And so you learn a little bit more behind the curtain today with Mickey Esposito from LTU and Fire Chief Michael Despain on Lincoln Fire and Rescue. Thank you for watching.
She's not breathing.
And now to that incredible rescue, all thanks to a very smart app for your smartphone. Watch this big man springing into action. We got a
Pulse Point is active in Lincoln and free in the App Store. Download it today. You could be the one.